The conversation that broke my family didn't end in tears or a slammed door. It concluded with my father leaning back in his chair, completely calm, and saying they'd triple my rent unless I agreed to a new set of rules. Rules that made me my sister's full-time, unpaid caretaker. My name is Maya, and for years I believed the most dangerous kind of pressure came from strangers or bosses. I was wrong. The most suffocating leverage comes wrapped in the words, "We're family," delivered by the people who taught you what that word meant. This is the story of how I vanished from their lives overnight and the quiet, calculated revenge of simply choosing myself. 6 years ago, signing the lease for the little garden apartment felt like a triumph. It was a property my parents owned, a converted coach house behind their main home in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The rent was a fraction of what it should have been, a gesture, they said, to help me get on my feet after college. I saw it as my first real sanctuary. I painted the walls a soft gray, hung string lights over the tiny patio, filled bookshelves with stories that were mine alone. I built a life there, slow and deliberate. A promotion at the design firm, a circle of friends who rang the doorbell instead of using a key. The slow accumulation of a peace I'd never known growing up. I believed I'd carved out independence. What I'd actually done was built my cage with borrowed tools. Our family portrait, the one displayed in a silver frame in their foyer, was a masterpiece of fiction. The smiling, coordinated unit at the lake, at holidays, at graduations. My older sister, Elena, was the sun in Matt's solar system, brilliant but volatile. Her needs dictated the weather for everyone else. When her marriage to David started fracturing under the weight of their 2 young boys, the family machinery, well-oiled and silent, shifted to compensate. I was the stabilizer, the reliable one, the one who could handle it. I'd absorbed that role since childhood, smoothing edges, calming storms, making myself smaller so Elena's world wouldn't crack. I mistook that erosion of my own wants for strength. The fissures started as hairline cracks. My mother's texts grew more frequent, laced with sighs about how overwhelmed Elena was. My father would drop by my apartment and make offhand comments about how lucky I was to have such flexible hours, such quiet life, such capacity. The word capacity began to feel like a threat. Then came the invitation. Family strategy dinner, mandatory attendance. The subject line alone felt like a summons to a tribunal. Walking into their dining room that evening, the air was thick with a rehearsed tension. My mother was arranging a charcuterie board with unnatural precision. My father stood at the head of the table, surveying a spreadsheet printed on crisp paper. Elena was already seated, her eyes fixed on her twisting napkin, a clear signal of her internal storm. "We've assessed the situation," my father began, bypassing any hello. No small talk, no pretense. This was a board meeting, and I was a department head about to be reassigned. My mother placed a glass of water in front of me, a gesture that felt like offering a condemned man a last meal. "Elena is struggling. David's new role has him traveling 80% of the month. The boys' after-school schedules are a logistical nightmare. She's drowning." I looked at Elena. "I'm so sorry, Elle. That sounds incredibly hard." She nodded. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't fake. Her pain was real. That was what made the trap so perfect. My father slid the spreadsheet toward me. His finger tapped a column of cells. "We have devised a sustainable solution, one that utilizes existing family resources." His finger tapped a column of cells. "Your office is 20-minute drive from the boys' school. Your work, as a designer, offers more telecommuting flexibility than Elena's nursing shifts. The logical conclusion is for you to assume primary afternoon and evening care." I scanned the document. It was a color-coded masterpiece of imposition. 2:45 p.m., depart office to pick up Alex, grade 3. 3:15 p.m., pick up Ben, grade 1. 3:30 p.m. to 6 p.m., supervise homework, snacks, activities at Elena's home. 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., prepare and serve dinner. Weekends, one full day of support alternating Saturdays and Sundays. It wasn't a request. It was a shift schedule for a job I never applied for. This is every weekday plus weekends? My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. It's temporary, my mother said, her tone implying anything lasting less than a decade was merely a brief interval. Just until David's travel comes down or Elena can reorganize. And my job? My own life? You'll manage. You always do. That's your role in this family, my father stated.
The phrase, your role, hit me like a physical weight. It defined me as a function, not a person. Then came the hammer, the velvet-covered, family-branded hammer. We understand this is a significant commitment, my father continued, his voice dropping into a softer, more dangerous register. And we want to be fair. To incentivize your participation in the family's well-being, we'll keep your rent at its current symbolic level. If, however, you feel you cannot contribute in this vital way, we will have no choice but to adjust your housing costs to reflect true market value. A 3-bedroom coach house in this neighborhood commands at least $2,800 a month. The numbers hung in the air. My rent was $750. They were threatening a 273% increase. My mother reached over and patted my hand. We're not threatening you, Maya. We're presenting a choice. Be a fully integrated, supportive part of this family unit, or exercise your independence at the full financial cost. Choice. They kept using that word. A choice between servitude and bankruptcy isn't a choice. It's a coercion in a cardigan. Elena finally spoke, her voice a fragile thread. I really need my sister right now. In that moment, looking at their expectant faces, my father's cool appraisal, my mother's performative concern, my sister's genuine but weaponized distress, something in my core didn't shatter. It solidified. It turned to ice and steel. The part of me that had always bent finally reached its yield point. I took a slow sip of water, buying 3 seconds of silence. This is a lot to process. I need to think. My father's patience, a thin veneer, cracked. The situation is urgent. We need a decision by tomorrow. You'll have my decision tomorrow, I said, standing. My legs felt steady, but I need to think in my own space. I left the house without another word. The cool night air didn't feel like an assault. It felt like an awakening. The drive home wasn't a retreat. It was a reconnaissance mission. I walked into my beautiful, curated apartment and saw it for what it had become. Not a home, but a tether. Every painted wall, every strung light was a thread in the net they'd woven around me. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat at my desk, turned on my laptop, and entered a state of cold, hyper-focused clarity. The first search wasn't for apartments. It was for my lease agreement. I scrolled past the signatures to the clauses on rent increases and termination. State law required 90 days written notice for any increase over 10%. They couldn't just spring it on me. Their threat was a bluff, a psychological weapon relying on my fear and ignorance. The second search was for apartments. I filtered for move-in ready within a strict budget based on my actual salary, not the subsidized fantasy I'd been living. Listings appeared, real ones, for places with no familial strings attached. I bookmarked 7. The next morning, I called my manager. Family emergency, I said, my voice even. I need to use 3 personal days. I didn't lie. This was the emergency, saving myself from my family. I toured 5 apartments in 2 days. The 5th was a top-floor loft in a converted warehouse district, 15 miles away in a city they never visited. It had polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a river, and the echoing emptiness of absolute freedom. I filled out the application in the agent's car, digital signatures sealing my future. Approval came within 12 hours. I signed the new lease electronically, the click of the mouse echoing in my silent apartment like a lock opening. Now came the operation. I bought packing supplies with cash. I began to box my life, not room by room, but category by category. Books first, then kitchenware, then decor. I worked methodically, silently, after work each night. The apartment transformed from a home into a staging ground for my escape. With every box sealed, I felt lighter. I was extracting my essence from their property. I drafted my notice to vacate. It was a model of sterile, legal perfection. Pursuant to Section 7D of the lease agreement, I hereby provide my 60-day notice to terminate tenancy. No explanation, no emotion. Just facts. I sent it via certified mail. The receipt was my declination of independence. The move was scheduled for a Saturday. I hired movers with a company my parents had never heard of. As they loaded the truck, a slow drizzle began to fall, obscuring the windows of the main house. I felt like a ghost, already half gone. After the last box, the last piece of furniture was loaded, I performed a final sweep. I cleaned every surface, left not a single speck of dust or memory. I wanted to leave a void, not a mess. I placed the keys on the bare kitchen counter. I took one last look at the string lights, now coiled in a box. Then I walked out, locked the door, and slid the keys through the mail slot. The final click of the deadbolt was the period at the end of their sentence. The silence in my car was profound. I drove to the new loft and began the reverse process. Unpacking wasn't just settling in, it was an act of installation, of planting my flag in sovereign territory. The onslaught began as I was unwrapping my coffee mugs. My phone erupted, a symphony of buzzing, ringing, vibrating against the concrete countertop. Call after call. My mother, my father, Elena. Their numbers flashed like alarm beacons. I let them ring. The voicemail notifications stacked up, 12, 18, 27. I didn't listen to a single one. I knew the scripts, the wounded confusion, the escalating anger, the guilt-soaked demands. By evening, I blocked all 3 numbers. The digital silence was jarring, but it was mine. I had carved out a bubble's quiet in the universe. The ceasefire lasted 4 days. On Wednesday, a formal-looking envelope arrived at my office, hand-delivered. My name was written in my mother's frantic script. Inside was a letter on my father's law firm letterhead, a blatant intimidation tactic. It accused me of breaching familial trust and abandoning contractual responsibilities, demanding an immediate meeting to avoid further legal escalation. The vagueness of the threat was its most transparent part. This was their next move, applying professional pressure. They'd tracked me to my workplace. A cold spike of fear shot through me, followed by a hotter surge of defiance. I took the letter straight to my friend's husband, a litigation attorney named James Chen. I laid it on his desk. He read it, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This is, impressively stupid," he said, not unkindly. "There's no contractual responsibility here outside your residential lease, which you terminated correctly. This is harassment dressed in legalese." "I do what?" he said. "We establish a perimeter." He drafted a response that was a masterpiece of professional chill. It stated that all future communications must go through him, that any further attempts to contact me at my place of employment constituted harassment, and that no legal claims exist to pursue. He mailed it on his firm's imposing stationery. The silence that followed this time was different. It was the silence of a retreated army. It was their silence. But family systems are ecosystems. Disturb one part, and tremors spread through the whole. A week later, my cousin Lisa called. From a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered.
"They're in total meltdown," she said, dispensing with hello. "Your mom is telling everyone you had a psychotic break. Your dad is furious he can't control the narrative. And Alina? They had to hire a nanny service. It's costing them nearly $4,000 a month. Your dad's covering it." There it was. The consequence. Not in my life, but in theirs. The responsibility they tried to outsource to me for $750 a month now had a real, market-driven price tag. The chaos had a budget line. I thought that was the end. I was wrong. James called me 2 weeks later. They've lawyered up. Properly this time. Their attorney has requested a mediated settlement discussion. A laugh, dry and brittle, escaped me.
A settlement for what? My freedom? For their narrative, James corrected. They want to formalize this, to get you back to the table. They hate that you're out of their reach. My advice? Go. Let's get their acknowledgement of your boundaries on the record in a room with a witness. Part of me wanted to refuse, to let them rot in the mess they'd made. But the smarter part, the part that had packed boxes in the dead of night, agreed. I wanted to look them in the eye from a position of unassailable strength. The mediation was held in a bland conference room in a corporate park. I wore a severe black blazer, my hair in a tight knot, armor. James walked beside me, a calm, immovable presence. My parents and Elena were already there, seated across from a vacant chair. A severe-looking woman, their attorney, sat next to my father. A neutral mediator sat at the head of the table. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed. My father wouldn't meet my gaze. Elena looked hollow. The mediator outlined the rules. My father spoke first. We are here because a severe misunderstanding has damaged our family. We offered Maya unparalleled support, and she interpreted our concern as an attack. I didn't flinch. I let him finish his revisionist history. My mother jumped in, her voice trembling with practiced hurt. We just wanted to keep our girls close, to help each other. We didn't know you felt so oppressed. The word oppressed hung in the air, a confession they didn't mean to make. It was my turn. I didn't raise my voice. I laid out the facts, cold and clean, like evidence on a table. On the evening of September 12th, you presented me with a daily schedule of labor for Elena's children. You attached a financial ultimatum to my refusal: pay market rent or provide unpaid labor. You quantified my value to the family as either a monthly payment of $2,800 or 30-plus hours of domestic service. That is not support. That is indentured servitude with a family discount. Their attorney shifted. My client's phrasing may have been clumsy, but their intent was familial solidarity. Their intent was to solve Elena's problem using my life as the tool. I looked directly at my sister. She flinched. You didn't ask for my help, Elena. You sat silent while they offered me up as a sacrifice to make your life easier. That's not solidarity. That's cannibalism. The room went utterly still. I had named the unspeakable thing. James leaned forward. Maya is willing to discuss a future relationship based on mutual respect between adults. The terms are non-negotiable. 1, no financial threats or entanglements. 2, no childcare obligations assumed or requested. 3, absolute respect for her autonomy, her career, and her home. Any violation ends contact. My father's face purpled. You expect us to sign a treaty with our own daughter? I expect you to acknowledge I am not a subsidiary of your family corporation. My time, my money, my life are mine, not family resources to be allocated. The negotiation that followed was brutal in its pettiness. They fought not over love, but over control. They balked at the word obligations. They argued that assuming I'd help was different than demanding. The mediator had to repeatedly steer them back from semantic swamps. Finally, exhausted and cornered by their own illogic, they agreed. The mediator typed a simple memorandum of understanding. It listed the 3 boundaries. We all signed it. It wasn't legally powerful, but its psychological weight was colossal. It was a receipt for my personhood. As we stood to leave, my mother approached me. Her armor of hurt had finally cracked, revealing genuine, bewildered pain underneath. I never thought you'd actually leave us. The tragedy of it almost buckled my knees. I whispered, "You didn't think I could." That was the whole problem. The first true morning of my new life, I woke to sun streaming through those massive windows, painting the concrete floor with gold. I made coffee and stood looking out at the river, at the city that knew nothing of my past. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of potential, my own. At work, freed from the constant emotional drainage, my creativity didn't just return, it exploded. I led a project that landed a major client. My performance reviews glowed. The energy I'd spent managing my family's expectations was now fuel for my own ambition. Meanwhile, the ecosystem adjusted. Elena, with a properly paid nanny, found her footing. Her marriage, without the scapegoat of no help, actually had to confront its own issues. My parents absorbed the financial and social cost of their gambit. The family support they orchestrated had a precise monthly deduction from their bank account. I heard through the cousin grapevine that it was the source of constant quiet tension. Months later, I met Alina for lunch. It was awkward, but clear-eyed. She apologized, not for how things went down, but for her silence, for her complicity. She didn't ask me to babysit. I didn't offer. We talked about books instead. It was the first honest conversation we'd had in a decade. Dinner with my parents took 6 months. We met at a busy, noisy restaurant. No place for a scene. The conversation was stilted, a series of cautious probes. They asked about my loft, my work. I answered politely, from behind the bulletproof glass of my boundaries. The love was still there, but it was distant, like watching a fire through a thick window, warm, but unable to burn me. Our relationship wasn't fixed. It was transformed. It was no longer a root system, tangled and suffocating. It was separate trees in a forest, respecting each other's space to grow. Disappearing wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of archaeology. I had to carefully brush away the layers of who they needed me to be to find the fossil of who I actually was. Setting boundaries didn't break my family. It revealed the cracks that were already there, letting in the light so something new could finally grow. I learned that the deepest betrayal isn't always a dramatic act of malice. Sometimes it's the quiet, confident expectation that your life is not your own, that your dreams are negotiable, that your freedom has a price they feel entitled to set. If you are in that quiet room, hearing that logical ultimatum, feeling the walls of obligation close in, know this: your life is not a family resource. Your time is not communal property. The most powerful response to emotional blackmail isn't a louder argument. It's quiet action. It's the meticulous, peaceful planning of your own exit. It's building a life so solidly your own that their leverage simply evaporates. Choosing yourself isn't the end of family. It's the beginning of a self you can finally bring to the table whole and unafraid.